I was sitting in my office when my phone rang, and I saw it was my mother calling at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, which was unusual because she knew I was always busy during work hours. "Mom, everything okay?" I answered, already sensing something was wrong from the urgency in her ringtone pattern. "Jake, you need to get to the hospital right now. It's your grandfather." Her voice was shaking, and I could hear my dad talking urgently in the background. My stomach dropped. Grandpa Ray was 78 but still sharp as a tack and healthier than most men half his age. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He was beaten up. Some security guards at his community attacked him. He's got a broken rib, a concussion, and they're still running tests." "We're at Mercy General in Phoenix." I didn't even respond. I just grabbed my keys, told my assistant I had a family emergency, and drove like a madman from my apartment in Scottsdale to the hospital. The whole 20-minute drive, my mind was racing. Grandpa Ray wasn't just any old man. He was Raymond Castellano, retired Phoenix police chief, who had served for 32 years before retiring 8 years ago. The man had connections throughout the entire state of Arizona, from the governor's office down to every precinct in the Phoenix metro area. Who the hell would be stupid enough to assault him? When I burst through the emergency room doors, I found my parents and my Aunt Linda in the waiting area. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father looked furious, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Room 147. "They're keeping him for observation," my dad said. "Jake, this is bad, really bad." I rushed down the hallway, my mother trailing behind me, explaining what she knew. "He called 911 himself. Said he was attacked in the parking lot of his community by two men claiming to be security. They demanded to see his ID. Said his car didn't belong there even though he's lived in Desert Springs for 3 years. When he tried to show them his resident card, they grabbed him, threw him to the ground, and started beating him." I pushed open the door to room 147 and felt my heart break. Grandpa Ray was lying in the hospital bed, his face a mess of bruises and cuts. His left eye was swollen shut, and there was a bandage wrapped around his head. But even in this state, when he saw me, he tried to smile. "Hey kiddo," he croaked out, "you should see the other guys." "Grandpa, what the hell happened?" I pulled a chair up next to his bed and took his hand carefully, aware of the Roman 4 line running into his arm. He took a breath, wincing from the pain in his ribs. "I was coming back from my morning walk. You know I do 3 miles every day around the community. I pulled into my assigned parking spot, and this white truck with Desert Springs security on the side pulled up behind me, blocking me in. 2 guys got out, both wearing these cheap security uniforms I'd never seen before. "Did you recognize them?" I asked. "Never seen them in my life. And I know every security guard who works at Desert Springs. Hell, I play poker with 2 of them every Thursday." He coughed, and my mother quickly poured him some water. "These guys were aggressive from the start. The bigger one, probably 6'3", 250, comes up to my window and starts banging on it, telling me to get out of the car. I rolled down my window and asked what the problem was. He said I was trespassing, that this vehicle wasn't registered with the HOA. "But you've had the same car for 2 years, I said. "Exactly." I showed him my resident parking permit hanging from my rearview mirror, clear as day, but he wasn't interested. He said the HOA president, some woman named Brenda Hutchins, had hired them to crack down on unauthorized vehicles and suspicious individuals. The name Brenda Hutchins sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I'd heard Grandpa complain about her before. She'd been elected HOA president 6 months ago and had immediately started implementing all sorts of ridiculous rules and fines. So what happened next? My mother asked, even though I could tell she didn't want to hear it. I told them I'd call the regular security company to verify who they were, that's when things got ugly. The big one reached through my window and tried to grab my keys from the ignition. I pushed his hand away, and that's when he opened my door and dragged me out. I'm 78 years old, for Christ's sake. I hit the ground hard, and before I could even get my bearings, both of them were on me. The second one, shorter but stocky, put his knee in my back while the first one was yelling about resisting and assaulting a security officer. I felt rage building in my chest. They claimed you assaulted them. Oh, it gets better, Grandpa Ray said, his good eye gleaming with that familiar sharp intelligence that made him such an effective police chief. I managed to get my phone out and dial 911, told the dispatcher I was being assaulted, gave my address. The moment they heard me on the phone, they backed off, got in their truck and took off. Real security doesn't run from cops. Did you get a license plate? I asked, already knowing the answer. Of course I did. Arizona plate, Charlie Juliet 738 Mike. Already gave it to the responding officers, and here's the kicker. When Phoenix PD showed up, they were former officers who worked under me, Detective Sarah Morrison and Officer Tim Chen. Sarah's already opened an investigation, and Tim took photos of everything. These idiots left their security company sign in the parking lot when they drove off. My mother looked at me with worry in her eyes. Jake, he shouldn't be talking this much. The doctor said he needs rest. I'll rest when this is handled, Grandpa Ray said firmly. I spent 32 years protecting this city. I'm not about to let some fake security thugs think they can beat up senior citizens and get away with it. A knock on the door interrupted us, and Detective Sarah Morrison walked in. She was in her mid-40s, professional and sharp, wearing a blazer and carrying a tablet. When she saw all of us crowded around the bed, she nodded respectfully. Chief Castellano, I'm sorry we have to meet again under these circumstances, she said. Then she looked at the rest of us. I'm Detective Morrison. I've been assigned to this case. What have you found out? I asked, standing up to shake her hand. Quite a bit, actually. The vehicle is registered to a company called Titan Security Solutions, based out of Mesa. I contacted them, and they claim they were hired by the Desert Springs HOA 3 weeks ago to provide supplementary security services. The two men in question are Marcus Webb and Tyler Crenshaw. Both have prior criminal records, assault charges, and neither has a valid security guard license in Arizona. How is that possible? My mother asked. Don't you need a license to work security? You absolutely do, Detective Morrison confirmed. Which means Titan Security Solutions is operating illegally, and whoever hired them, this Brenda Hutchins, either didn't do her due diligence or didn't care. We've issued warrants for Webb and Crenshaw's arrest for aggravated assault on a senior citizen, battery, and false imprisonment. The charges could escalate depending on the chief's medical reports. What about this HOA president? I asked. She's the one who hired them. That's where it gets complicated, Detective Morrison said carefully. Right now, we don't have evidence that she specifically directed them to assault anyone. She could claim she hired them in good faith and had no knowledge of their criminal backgrounds or lack of licenses. However, I've contacted the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs, and they're very interested in this case. If we can prove negligence or that she hired them knowing they were unlicensed, there could be civil and criminal liability. Grandpa Ray shifted in his bed, grimacing. Sarah, I want you to dig into this Brenda Hutchins. Something doesn't add up. Desert Springs has a contract with Sentinel Security, a legitimate company that's been working the community for 5 years. Why would she suddenly hire a second company, especially one with thugs like these two? I'm already on it, Chief, Detective Morrison said with a slight smile. Old habits die hard, huh? Once a cop, always a cop, he replied. After Detective Morrison left, promising to keep us updated, my father pulled me aside in the hallway. "Your grandfather is downplaying this. The doctor said if that rib had broken differently, it could have punctured his lung. He could have died in that parking lot." The weight of that statement hit me hard. "We need to find out everything about this Brenda Hutchins and why she hired these criminals." "I think you should go to Desert Springs," my dad said. "Your grandfather has a copy of all his HOA documents in his condo. Maybe there's something there that can help us understand what's going on." I agreed and got the key to Grandpa's place. Desert Springs was a gated community in North Phoenix, one of those sprawling 55-plus developments with a golf course, clubhouse, and about 400 homes. I'd visited plenty of times, and it always seemed like a peaceful, safe place for retirees. When I arrived at the main gate, there was a security guard I recognized, an older gentleman named Frank who'd always waved us through. "Hey, Frank," I said, rolling down my window. "I'm here to check on my grandfather's place, Ray Castellano." Frank's expression immediately changed to one of concern. "Jake, I heard what happened. Is Ray okay?" "He's going to be, but it's serious." "Frank, what can you tell me about these new security guys?" Frank looked around nervously, then leaned closer to my window. "Between you and me, nobody likes them. They showed up about 3 weeks ago, driving around in their truck, harassing residents. They're not part of Sentinel Security, which is who we actually work for. Mrs. Hutchins hired them on the side, said they were going to help crack down on rule violations. But they're not trained, they're rude, and they've been picking fights with people." "Has anyone filed complaints?" I asked. "At least a dozen that I know of, but Mrs. Hutchins dismisses them all. She says residents are too soft and that the community needs strong enforcement." He shook his head. "Your grandfather isn't the first person they've gotten physical with. Last week, they shoved an 80-year-old man because his trash cans were still out past 10 in the morning. His daughter is talking about suing." This was bigger than I thought. "Frank, would you be willing to give a statement to the police?" "Absolutely. Ray's a good man. What happened to him is criminal." I thanked Frank and drove to Grandpa's condo. It was a nice 2-bedroom unit with a view of the 8th fairway. Inside, everything was neat and organized, exactly how you'd expect a former police chief to keep his home. I found his HOA files in a cabinet in his office, and I started going through them. The documents painted an interesting picture. Brenda Hutchins had been elected HOA president in September, running on a platform of restoring order and property values. She'd immediately raised HOA fees by 30%, implemented new rules about everything from lawn ornaments to what color curtains you could have, and started issuing fines for minor violations. There were dozens of complaint letters from residents, all dismissed by the HOA board. But what really caught my attention was a notice sent out 3 weeks ago announcing the hiring of Titan Security Solutions. The letter claimed that crime was increasing in the community, and that additional security measures were necessary. It mentioned that Titan would be conducting proactive patrols and enforcement of community standards. I took photos of everything and noticed something else. There was a folder labeled Financial Concerns, where Grandpa had been documenting discrepancies in the HOA's financial reports. He'd highlighted several large expenses that weren't properly explained, including a $20,000 payment to something called Security Consulting Services, and another $15,000 to Community Enhancement Project, with no details about what that project was. My grandfather wasn't just some random victim. He'd been investigating potential HOA fraud. I called Detective Morrison and told her what I'd found. "This might not have been random at all," I said. "I think my grandfather was targeted because he was asking questions about where the HOA money was going." "That changes things significantly," she said. I'm going to get a warrant for the HOA's financial records. If there's fraud involved, this becomes a much bigger case. And Jake, be careful. If your theory is right, these people are dangerous. I spent the rest of the afternoon at Grandpa's condo, making sure everything was secure and collecting more documents. As evening approached, I decided to take a walk around the community to get a feel for the place and maybe talk to some residents. I was walking past the clubhouse when I heard raised voices coming from inside. The building was supposed to be closed, but the front door was slightly ajar. I quietly approached and peered through the window. Inside, I could see a woman in her early 50s, blonde hair styled in an aggressive bob cut, wearing expensive athleisure wear and gesturing wildly at two men. One was tall and broad, the other shorter and built like a bulldog. These had to be Marcus Webb and Tyler Crenshaw, the fake security guards who'd beaten up my grandfather. "I told you to scare him, not send him to the hospital," the woman, who I assumed was Brenda Hutchins, was shouting. "Do you have any idea what you've done? He's the former police chief. Every cop in Phoenix is going to be looking for you." He fought back. The bigger one, probably Webb, said defensively, "What were we supposed to do? Not break his ribs?" Brenda paced back and forth. This was supposed to be simple. He was asking too many questions about the finances, so you were supposed to rough him up a little, scare him into backing off. Not nearly kill him. My blood ran cold. This confirmed everything. It wasn't random. They deliberately targeted Grandpa Ray because he was investigating the HOA's finances. I pulled out my phone and started recording video through the window, making sure I had a clear view of all three of them. "What do we do now?" the shorter one, Crenshaw, asked. "The cops have our names." "You disappear," Brenda said coldly. "I'll wire you the rest of the money we agreed on, $5,000 each, and you leave Arizona. Go to Nevada, California, I don't care. Just get out of here." "That wasn't the deal," Webb said angrily. "You said $10,000 each. That was before you created a disaster. You're lucky I'm giving you anything. Now take the money and go, or I'll tell the police you acted on your own, that I had no idea you were going to assault anyone." The two men looked at each other, clearly unhappy but also clearly not wanting to argue with a woman who was threatening to throw them under the bus. "Fine," Webb finally said. "But if we go down, you're coming with us." "Just leave," Brenda said. "I have to figure out how to spin this to the board and the residents. I had everything I needed." I quietly backed away from the window and called Detective Morrison immediately. "I just recorded a confession," I said quickly. Brenda Hutchins, the HOA president, admitted on camera that she hired those men to assault my grandfather because he was investigating HOA financial fraud. She's currently in the clubhouse with Webb and Crenshaw, and she's trying to pay them off to leave the state. "Don't do anything," Detective Morrison said urgently. "I'm sending units right now. Stay away from that clubhouse and don't let them see you. I'm hidden, just hurry." I crouched behind a row of bushes near the clubhouse, keeping my phone camera trained on the entrance. About 8 minutes later, 4 Phoenix police patrol cars rolled into the parking lot silently, no lights or sirens. Detective Morrison arrived right behind them in an unmarked sedan. Officers quickly surrounded the building, and I saw Detective Morrison approach the front door with 3 officers behind her. She knocked loudly. "Phoenix Police, open the door." There was a moment of silence, then chaos inside. I could hear shouting and what sounded like furniture moving. One of the officers kicked in the door and the entire team rushed inside. Through the windows, I could see the confrontation. Webb tried to run for the back exit but was immediately tackled by 2 officers. Crenshaw put his hands up without a fight. Brenda Hutchins was screaming something about her rights and demanding to call her lawyer. Within minutes, all 3 of them were brought out in handcuffs. Brenda was still yelling, her face red with rage and fear. "This is illegal. "You have no right to arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Morrison said calmly. "I suggest you use it." As they were loading the suspects into patrol cars, Detective Morrison walked over to where I was standing. "That video you got is going to be crucial evidence. Can you send it to me right now?" I immediately air-texted the video file to her phone. Everything they said is on there. Brenda admitted she hired them to assault my grandfather because he was investigating financial fraud. "This is now a conspiracy to commit assault case, plus whatever financial crimes we find when we dig into the HOA records," she said. "Your grandfather's instincts were right. Something was definitely wrong with the finances here." Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Grandpa Ray was released from the hospital with strict orders to rest and let his ribs heal. My parents brought him to stay at their house where they could look after him. Despite his injuries, he was in surprisingly good spirits, especially when he heard that all 3 suspects had been arrested. Detective Morrison kept us updated as the investigation unfolded. The financial audit of the Desert Springs HOA revealed massive fraud. Brenda Hutchins had been embezzling money for months, creating fake companies, and billing the HOA for services that were never provided. Security Consulting Services and Community Enhancement Project were both shell companies that existed only on paper. She'd stolen over $90,000 from the HOA funds. The residents of Desert Springs were outraged when they learned the truth. There was an emergency meeting to remove Brenda from her position and dissolve the entire HOA board, which had apparently been complicit or at least negligently ignorant of her activities. Marcus Webb and Tyler Crenshaw both had extensive criminal records. Webb had 2 prior assault convictions and had served time for battery. Crenshaw had been fired from a legitimate security company for excessive force. Titan Security Solutions turned out to be run by Webb's cousin, who'd been operating without proper licensing for over a year. The legal process was long but thorough. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp woman named Andrea Walsh, took it very seriously. She'd worked with Grandpa Ray years ago when she was a rookie attorney, and she was determined to get justice. "They messed with the wrong person," she told us during a meeting at her office. Assaulting a senior citizen is already a serious crime. But when you add conspiracy, financial fraud, and the fact that the victim is a respected former police chief, the judge is not going to be lenient. Brenda Hutchins tried every legal trick in the book. Her expensive lawyer argued that she was a respected businesswoman, that the assault was the fault of the security guards acting beyond their authority, and that any financial irregularities were accounting errors. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video I'd recorded, combined with financial records and testimony from multiple residents, painted a clear picture of a woman who'd abused her position for personal gain and had ordered violence against someone who threatened to expose her. The preliminary hearing was held in late August at the Maricopa County Superior Court. I attended with my parents and Grandpa Ray, who insisted on being there despite still having some lingering pain from his injuries. The courtroom was packed with residents from Desert Springs, many of whom wanted to see justice served. When Brenda Hutchins was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the polished, aggressive woman I'd seen in the clubhouse, there was a palpable sense of satisfaction in the room. Her lawyer had tried to get her released on bail, but given the severity of the charges and the flight risk, the judge had denied it. Webb and Crenshaw appeared separately. Both had taken plea deals, agreeing to testify against Brenda in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimony was damning. "She called me in mid-July," Webb testified, looking uncomfortable in his prison clothes. Said she had a problem with a resident who was causing trouble, asking questions about money, and making the other board members nervous. She wanted him intimidated, scared enough to back off. She offered us $5,000 each to do it. Did she specifically tell you to assault Raymond Castellano? The prosecutor asked. She said to make it physical if we had to. Rough him up a little, make him understand that he needed to mind his own business. She said he was an old man and wouldn't fight back. But he did fight back. He tried to defend himself. That's when things got out of hand. Crenshaw's testimony was similar. He admitted they'd been hired specifically to target my grandfather, and that Brenda had assured them she'd protect them if anything went wrong. She said she had connections, that the HOA had lawyers who could make problems go away, Crenshaw said. She made it sound like we'd be protected. The evidence against Brenda was so overwhelming that her lawyer eventually advised her to accept a plea deal. She refused, apparently convinced that she could somehow talk her way out of it, or that the jury would sympathize with her claim that she was just trying to protect the community. The trial began in October. It lasted 2 weeks, and I attended every day. Grandpa Ray testified, describing in detail the assault and his injuries. He was calm and professional on the stand, but I could see the anger in his eyes when he looked at Brenda. "Did you have any interaction with Mrs. Hutchins prior to the assault?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes, I'd sent several emails to the HOA board asking for detailed financial reports. I'd noticed discrepancies in the monthly statements and wanted clarification." Mrs. Hutchins responded that the finances were none of my business and that questioning the board was disruptive to community harmony. "What made you suspicious of the finances?" "I spent 32 years as a police officer, including 15 years investigating financial crimes before becoming chief. I know what embezzlement looks like. Large payments to vague vendors with no supporting documentation, cash withdrawals that aren't explained, sudden increases in fees without corresponding increases in services. All red flags." The defense tried to argue that Grandpa Ray was a meddling busybody who'd harassed Brenda, and that she'd hired additional security out of legitimate concern for community safety. But the financial evidence was irrefutable. Forensic accountants testified about the shell companies, the fake invoices, and the money that had gone directly into Brenda's personal accounts. The video I'd recorded was played in court, and it was devastating. Watching Brenda admit on camera that she'd ordered the assault because Grandpa was investigating her was the turning point. Several jurors looked visibly angry after seeing it. The defense also tried to discredit me, suggesting that I'd illegally recorded the conversation. But the prosecutor explained that Arizona is a one-party consent state, and since I was recording people who had no reasonable expectation of privacy in a semi-public space like a clubhouse, the recording was completely legal. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, assault on a senior citizen, embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Brenda Hutchins showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but her lawyer looked defeated. Sentencing was scheduled for November. The prosecutor recommended the maximum sentence given the severity of the crimes and the breach of trust involved. Brenda had been in a position of authority and had abused it in the worst possible way. Several residents of Desert Springs gave victim impact statements, describing how Brenda's theft had affected the community, and how her reign as HOA president had created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. When it was Grandpa Ray's turn to speak, he stood slowly, still moving carefully because of his healed ribs, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, I spent my entire adult life serving the people of Phoenix. I've seen a lot of criminals in my time, but what makes this case particularly egregious is the betrayal of trust. Mrs. Hutchins was elected by her neighbors to represent their interests and protect their community. Instead, she stole from them and, when caught, ordered violence against an elderly man. She showed no remorse, no recognition of the harm she caused. The message needs to be clear that this behavior will not be tolerated. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Henderson, nodded thoughtfully. She'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for being fair but tough on crime. Mrs. Hutchins, Judge Henderson said, looking directly at the defendant. You held a position of trust and responsibility, and you violated that trust in every way possible. You stole from your neighbors, you hired criminals to assault an elderly man, and you showed no remorse throughout this entire process. Your actions could have resulted in Mr. Castellano's death. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. On the charge of embezzlement and fraud, I sentence you to 8 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. On the charge of conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, I sentence you to 6 years. On the charge of assault on a senior citizen, I sentence you to 5 years. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently, for a total of 19 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to the Desert Springs HOA in the amount of $93,000, plus court costs and fees. There was a collective gasp in the courtroom. 19 years was a serious sentence, but given the crimes and Brenda's complete lack of remorse, it seemed appropriate. Brenda finally showed emotion, her face crumpling as the reality of spending nearly 2 decades in prison hit her. Her lawyer immediately began talking about appeals, but Judge Henderson was unmoved. Marcus Webb and Tyler Crenshaw, having taken plea deals and testified against Brenda, received lighter sentences. Webb got 5 years, Crenshaw got 4. Both would also have to pay restitution and would lose any security licenses permanently. After the sentencing, there was a small gathering at my parents' house. Grandpa Ray was finally starting to look like himself again, the bruises faded and his energy returning. "You did good work, kiddo," he said to me, raising a glass of wine. "That video you got was the key to everything." "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me to pay attention, to document everything, and to never let bad guys get away with it." Detective Morrison stopped by as well, now permanently assigned to the HOA fraud task force that had been created after this case revealed how common such crimes were. "We've identified at least a dozen other communities in the Phoenix area with similar patterns of financial irregularities," she told us. "Your case has opened up a whole investigation. Turns out a lot of HOA boards are engaged in some level of fraud, and nobody's really been paying attention." "That needs to change," Grandpa Ray said firmly. "HOAs control billions of dollars nationwide. There needs to be better oversight and accountability." Over the following months, things slowly returned to normal. The Desert Springs HOA elected a new board, implemented strict financial controls, and hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations. Several residents approached Grandpa Ray about running for HOA president himself, but he politely declined. "I've done my time in leadership positions," he told them. "I'm retired, and I intend to stay that way, but I'll be happy to serve on a financial oversight committee." The stolen money was recovered through asset seizures. Brenda had spent some of it on luxury items and vacations, but most was still in her accounts. The HOA was made whole, and the fees were actually reduced since they no longer needed to cover the excessive expenses Brenda had been creating. Titan Security Solutions was shut down permanently, and Webb's cousin was prosecuted for operating without proper licensing. Sentinel Security, the legitimate company that had been working Desert Springs for years, resumed full duties, and Frank, the security guard, became something of a hero for speaking up about the fake security guards. There were civil lawsuits as well. My family considered suing Brenda personally for what she'd done to Grandpa Ray, but ultimately decided against it. She was going to prison for 19 years and had to pay restitution. That seemed like justice enough. The local news covered the story extensively. Former police chief takes down corrupt HOA president was the headline on several articles. Reporters wanted to interview Grandpa Ray, but he declined most requests, never one to seek attention. He did agree to one interview with an investigative journalist from the Arizona Republic, who was writing a larger piece about HOA fraud. During that interview, he was asked what advice he'd give to other homeowners who suspect their HOA might be engaging in fraud. "Document everything," he said. "Request financial reports, which you're legally entitled to see. Look for red flags like vague expenses, payments to unfamiliar companies, or resistance from board members when you ask questions. And if something seems wrong, don't be intimidated. Report it to the authorities. Most HOA boards are honest people trying to serve their communities, but the ones that aren't can do serious damage." The article came out in January and sparked a statewide conversation about HOA oversight. Several legislators introduced bills to increase transparency requirements and create stronger penalties for HOA fraud. Grandpa Ray was invited to testify before a state legislative committee, which he did, lending his expertise and credibility to the cause. As for me, the experience changed my perspective on a lot of things. I'd always known my grandfather was a respected figure, but seeing how many people rallied around him, how seriously the justice system took what happened to him, and how his investigation led to broader reforms made me incredibly proud. I also learned that standing up to bullies and criminals, even when they hide behind official-sounding titles like HOA president or security officer, is always the right thing to do. My grandfather could have backed off when Brenda told him to mind his own business. He could have ignored the financial irregularities and just enjoyed his retirement. But that wasn't who he was. He'd spent his life fighting for what was right, and he wasn't going to stop just because he'd retired. The following spring, Desert Springs held a community appreciation event at the clubhouse. It was the same building where I'd recorded Brenda's confession, but now it felt different, lighter somehow, free from the oppressive atmosphere she'd created. The new HOA president, a retired accountant named David Chen, presented Grandpa Ray with a plaque thanking him for his service to the community. There was a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, and I saw tears in my grandfather's eyes, though he'd deny it later. "I didn't do anything special," he said in his brief remarks. "I just asked questions and refused to be intimidated. That's what all of you should do. This is your community, your money, and your home. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't have the right to know what's happening." Afterward, there was a barbecue and music, and I watched my grandfather hold court with a group of residents, sharing stories and laughing. This was what retirement should have been all along, peaceful and enjoyable, not marred by corruption and violence. Frank, the security guard, pulled me aside at one point. "You know, I've worked security for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like what your grandfather went through. But I've also never seen someone handle it better. He could have been bitter or scared, but instead he fought back and made things better for everyone. That's just who he is," I said proudly. As the sun set over the golf course and the party continued, I reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a terrifying phone call about my grandfather being in the hospital had turned into a major criminal investigation, exposed widespread HOA fraud, and led to significant reforms. 3 people were in prison, A community was healed, and my grandfather had once again proven that you can't keep a good cop down, retired or not. The legal system had worked. Justice had been served. And most importantly, my grandfather was okay, surrounded by people who appreciated him and living the peaceful retirement he'd earned. A few weeks later, I was back at work when I got a call from Detective Morrison. "Hey Jake, thought you'd want to know, Brenda Hutchins's appeal was denied. The sentence stands." "Good," I said. "She deserved every year of it." "Agreed. Also, I wanted to thank you again for your help with this case. That video and your quick thinking made all the difference." "Ever thought about a career in law enforcement?" I laughed. "I think one cop in the family is enough, but I appreciate the compliment." After hanging up, I called my grandfather to let him know about the appeal being denied. "Justice doesn't always happen," he said, "but when it does, it's something worth celebrating. Now, are you coming over for dinner on Sunday? Your grandmother is making lasagna." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. That Sunday, sitting around my grandparents' dinner table with my parents and aunt, listening to Grandpa Ray tell stories about his days on the force, I felt grateful for everything. Grateful that he'd survived the assault, grateful for the justice system that held his attackers accountable, and grateful that I came from a family that believed in doing the right thing no matter the cost. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Grandpa Ray said between bites of lasagna. "Those fake security guards thought they were targeting some helpless old man. They had no idea I spent 32 years in law enforcement, that I had connections throughout the department, or that I knew exactly how to build a case against them. The look on their faces when they realized who I was, that was priceless." "You're lucky you had those connections," my Aunt Linda said. "What about people who don't have that kind of backup?" "That's why we pushed for the legislative changes," Grandpa Ray replied seriously. "Every homeowner deserves protection from corrupt HOA boards, whether they're former cops or not. The laws are stronger now, the oversight is better, and hopefully what happened to me won't happen to anyone else." Several months passed, and life truly did return to normal. Grandpa Ray went back to his morning walks, his poker games, and his volunteer work with at-risk youth. The physical injuries healed completely, and while I knew the emotional impact of being attacked in his own community would stay with him, he handled it with the same strength and grace he'd shown throughout his entire life. The broader impact of the case continued to unfold. The Arizona Department of Real Estate created a special HOA fraud investigation unit. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and similar investigations were launched in other states. It turned out that HOA fraud was a massive problem that had been largely ignored, and our case became the catalyst for change. I ran into Andrea Walsh, the prosecutor, at a coffee shop one afternoon. She told me that the case had become a teaching example in legal circles about how to prosecute complex fraud schemes and conspiracy charges. "Your grandfather's testimony was masterful," she said. "He explained the financial irregularities in a way that the jury could understand, and his credibility as a former police chief was unshakable. Plus, that video you recorded was the smoking gun we needed. Without it, Brenda's lawyers might have been able to create enough reasonable doubt to get an acquittal." "I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time," I said. "It wasn't luck," Andrea replied. "You had the instincts and training your grandfather taught you. You recognized something was wrong, you documented it, and you didn't put yourself in danger. That's good investigative work." About a year after the assault, Desert Springs held an anniversary event to commemorate the changes in the community. The new HOA board had transformed the culture completely. There were regular town halls where residents could voice concerns. Financial reports were published monthly with complete transparency, and any major decisions required community input. Grandpa Ray was invited to cut the ribbon on a new community garden that had been built with some of the recovered embezzlement funds. It was a symbol of renewal, taking something that had been stolen and using it to create something beautiful and productive. "This is what communities should be about," he said during his remarks. "Working together, trusting each other, and holding leaders accountable. What happened here last year was terrible, but look at what you've built from it. This is the strongest, most engaged HOA I've ever seen." The applause was thunderous, and I felt a swell of pride watching my grandfather, fully recovered and thriving, surrounded by a community that valued him. Later that evening, back at his condo, Grandpa Ray and I sat on his patio watching the sunset over the golf course. It was peaceful and quiet, exactly what retirement should be. "You know what I learned from all this," he said, sipping his coffee. "What's that?" "That evil people count on good people staying quiet. Brenda thought she could intimidate me into backing off. Those fake security guards thought they could beat me into submission. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong is that I've spent my entire life standing up to bullies, and I wasn't about to stop just because I'm old." "You're not old," I protested. "You're experienced." He laughed. "I'm 78, that's old, but age is just a number. What matters is whether you're willing to fight for what's right." "You taught me that," I said. "Everything I know about integrity and standing up for people comes from watching you." "Then I did my job as a grandfather," he said, patting my shoulder, "and as a cop. Because policing isn't really about the badge or the gun. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves and making sure justice is served. I might be retired, but those principles don't retire." As darkness fell and the stars came out, I thought about how close we'd come to losing him. If those injuries had been just slightly worse, if he hadn't been able to call 911, if the responding officers had been anyone other than people who knew and respected him, things could have ended very differently. But they didn't. Justice prevailed. The criminals went to prison. The community was healed and strengthened. And my grandfather, the toughest, smartest, most principled man I'd ever known, was exactly where he should be, enjoying the retirement he'd earned through decades of service. The story of the fake HOA security guards who beat up a retired police chief became something of a legend in law enforcement circles. I heard from Detective Morrison that it was being used in training seminars as an example of why you should never underestimate victims and always investigate thoroughly. Your grandfather's case led to at least 30 other HOA fraud investigations across Arizona, she told me during a chance meeting at a restaurant. And those investigations have recovered over $2 million in stolen funds. The ripple effects of what he uncovered are still spreading. That made me smile. Even in retirement, even as a victim of a crime, Grandpa Ray had managed to make a difference that extended far beyond his own situation. The criminal justice system isn't perfect. Cases sometimes take too long, verdicts aren't always fair, and justice can be elusive. But in this case, everything worked the way it should. The criminals were caught, prosecuted, and sent to prison. The victims were vindicated. The community was made stronger, and important reforms were implemented to prevent similar crimes in the future. As I drove home that night, I called my grandfather one more time. "Hey kiddo, what's up?" he answered. "Nothing really, just wanted to tell you I'm proud to be your grandson." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know, Jake, more than any plaque or recognition or anything else. Family is what matters. And knowing I raised a son and grandson who care about doing the right thing, that's my real legacy. Love you, Grandpa. Love you too, kiddo." I hung up feeling grateful, proud, and reminded of an important truth. It doesn't matter how tough the criminals think they are, how much authority they claim to have, or how scared they think they can make their victims. In the end, justice has a way of catching up to people who abuse power and hurt innocent people. And if those criminals happen to target someone with decades of law enforcement experience, connections throughout the justice system, and a grandson stubborn enough to record their confession, well, that's not just justice. That's poetic justice. The fake HOA security guards thought they were targeting a helpless old man. They had no idea he was retired police chief Raymond Castellano, a man who'd spent 32 years putting criminals behind bars, and who wasn't about to let a little thing like retirement stop him from doing it one more time. They learned their lesson the hard way, sitting in prison with years left on their sentences, knowing they'd been outsmarted and outmaneuvered by the very man they'd beaten up. And Brenda Hutchins, the corrupt HOA president who thought she could steal from her neighbors and silence anyone who questioned her, she learned it too. In the end, the good guys won. Justice was served, and a community that had been held hostage by corruption and violence became stronger, more transparent, and more engaged than ever before. That's the way these stories are supposed to end, and I'm grateful that this one did. Years from now, when I think back on this chapter of our lives, I won't remember the fear I felt rushing to the hospital, or the anger I felt seeing my grandfather bruised and broken in that hospital bed. I'll remember how he fought back, how justice prevailed, and how one man's refusal to be intimidated led to sweeping reforms that protected countless other homeowners across the state. That's the legacy of retired police chief Raymond Castellano, not just the 32 years he served, but what he continued to do even after putting down the badge. He proved that doing the right thing doesn't require a uniform or a title. It just requires courage, integrity, and the refusal to let criminals win. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.